What if I told you that what happened in that garage wasn't about a Tesla or a Karen or a workshop at all? What if I told you it was part of something older, buried deep beneath your neighborhood, your laws, and your mind? It always starts small, a noise complaint here, a parking violation there, but that's how it spreads. Control masked as civility, a handshake hiding handcuffs. The HOA, three little letters that sound harmless, but beneath the surface, it's a microcosm of something ancient, the architecture of domination. You see, Patricia Harrington didn't just leave her Tesla in Jake's workshop. She placed it, like a chess piece, like a sigil, like a symbol of encroachment, the modern version of an old ritual, one meant to test the boundaries of sovereignty. Because power never kicks in your door. It creeps, it smiles, it measures your grass with a ruler and tells you it's for your safety. And if you don't push back, it doesn't stop. It takes your space, your will, your fire. Jake didn't just weld that car to the concrete. He made a declaration. This land, this mind, this soul, you don't get to occupy it without cost. It wasn't a prank. It was a reckoning, a war cry whispered through steel and fire. But why did it resonate so deeply online? Why did millions of men click, watch, replay, eyes locked on the image of that white Tesla sealed like a tomb? Because deep down, they recognized the ritual. They saw the trespass. They saw the quiet invasion of modern authority disguised as HOA bylaws. And something in them snapped awake. This wasn't about one man. It was about all of us. It was about the workshop in your life that's been quietly invaded by a system smiling through red lipstick and fake concern. OA wasn't a homeowners group anymore. It was a psychological algorithm, one that only stops when someone like Jake welds it shut. You think that's just a story? No, it's a warning. They call it community standards. But whose standards? Whose vision of perfection are we being measured against? It doesn't matter if it's a lawn, a mailbox, or a noise complaint. These rules weren't made to protect you. They were made to condition you, train you, break you into something manageable. You see, Patricia didn't act alone. She was playing out a role written long before she ever became President Harrington. HOA boards across America are built on a framework handed down from developers, corporations, and municipal interests. They're not elected out of democracy. They're selected for compliance. Bureaucratic enforcers in yoga pants and pastel smiles, agents of soft tyranny. And it always begins the same way. A new rule, a small fine, a policy shift for the good of the neighborhood. But when you comply once, you give them a blueprint. They learn your tolerances, your pain points. And if you resist, suddenly you're uncooperative, you're hostile, you're a problem that must be removed, or you're neutralized. Jake's garage wasn't just a workspace, it was sovereign territory, the last square of land in a man's life that answered only to him. That's why it had to be invaded, not because it was loud, not because it was ugly, but because it was independent. And to the system, nothing is more dangerous than a man who refuses to kneel. Patricia's Tesla, that wasn't just a car, that was a flag, a symbol staked in conquered land. It was a psychological siege, quiet, smug, and sanctioned by the bylaws. But Jake, he didn't just push back. He didn't file a complaint or wait for the board. He did something far more subversive. He acted. He chose fire over fear, steel over submission. And when he sealed that car inside his domain, he wasn't just locking out a vehicle, he was locking out a system, a mindset, an invasive ideology that teaches men to bow for peace. And when he left for the mountains, that wasn't an escape, that was a message. He knew she would return. He wanted her to. Because in war, you don't retreat. You choose the battlefield. And now, you're starting to see it, aren't you? The laws aren't written for us, they're written to contain us. Power doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't knock down the door. It convinces you to open it yourself. That's how they built this system, through rituals of invisible compliance, meetings, ballots, policies, all carefully designed to make you believe you agreed to your own submission. But Jake saw through the illusion. He understood something most never will. Power only exists where it is permitted, and permission can be revoked. When Patricia marched across his lawn, Starbucks in hand, she didn't see a man, she saw a subject, a resident, someone beneath her, bound by rules she thought were gospel. She thought the bylaws were her armor, but Jake had read them too, and between every line he found weakness. Because here's the truth. Every system that controls you is built on the assumption that you'll never call its bluff, that you'll follow the process, wait your turn, file a complaint. But when Jake welded that Tesla to the floor, that was heresy. It wasn't about property anymore. It was about symbolic reversal. The invader had been entombed. That's why it hit so hard, because every man watching saw a piece of himself in that act, a piece that's been caged for years, the part that remembers what it feels like to enforce your own boundaries, not with words, but with fire, steel, and consequence. And what did Jake do after securing his territory? He vanished into the wild. That wasn't just camping, that was ascension. Because a true sovereign doesn't wait for applause. He doesn't explain himself. He acts, then disappears, like a ghost from a forgotten time, a time when men didn't ask permission to exist. And while Patricia fumed and flailed, Jake was staring into flames under the stars, finally at peace. Not because he won, but because he remembered. And now, so do you. But remembering isn't enough. If you're ready to reclaim your domain, not just your property, but your mind, comment this below. Steel over silence, fire over fear. Say it twice, once for your past self, and once for the version they don't want you to become, because Section 4 goes deeper, and from here on out, there's no turning back. What Patricia never understood, what most people never even question, is that she was never truly in control. She was a proxy, a puppet dressed in power, wired to a deeper current. The HOA, that's the surface layer, a mask, a test environment, a simulation of government, built to see how far people will go to police each other before the real chains are applied. This is the hidden machinery of control, not by force, but by delegation. Get the people to enforce the rules on themselves, and you don't need soldiers. You need Karens. You need bylaws. You need violations. That's how you enslave a nation without ever raising a weapon. And it starts in neighborhoods like Maplewood Heights. You think that workshop was just a garage? No, that was a spiritual firewall. Jake had carved out a zone of unregulated freedom in a world that demands uniformity. And the system reacted, not with law, but with shame, with passive aggression, with bureaucratic witchcraft disguised as suburban order. Understand this. Whenever a man builds something sacred, a business, a body, a family, a boundary, agents of the structure will appear. Sometimes it's an HOA president. Sometimes it's a boss, a code officer, a spouse, a social media mob. The face changes. The function does not. Their purpose is always the same: infiltrate, evaluate, dominate. But Jake did what few ever do. He interrupted the ritual. He broke the pattern. He sabotaged the script. By welding that car down, he wasn't just reacting. He was reprogramming the system with a message that couldn't be ignored. And when Patricia came back, shrieking like a priestess robbed of her altar, she didn't just find her car disabled. She found the spell broken. The neighbors were watching now. The board had convened without her. The very mechanism she used to dominate had turned against her. Because Jake didn't win with force, he won with clarity. That's the real revolution, not firepower, perception. Because once you see the strings, you don't dance anymore. And now you see them too. But what comes next? That's where most men fall, because the deeper you go, the more the system fights back. When systems break, they don't vanish. They thrash. They flail like a serpent that's been wounded but not killed. And that's exactly what Patricia became. Not a person anymore, but an avatar of a dying order, desperate to reassert control. You saw it, the storming across the lawn, the threats, the lawsuits, the police. That wasn't rage, that was panic, because the structure she worshipped had failed her. The bylaws no longer protected her. The fake titles, the committees, the smile-polished tyranny, all of it collapsed under the weight of one man's refusal to bend. Jake didn't yell, he didn't beg, he didn't argue on Facebook. He documented, he executed, and he walked away while the empire of petty power burned behind him. The neighbors saw, the police saw, even the new HOA board saw. Not a vandal, not a criminal, but a man who had reached the end of obedience and answered with precision. Patricia thought her presidency made her untouchable, but that title, like all false authority, was paper-thin. And when the board removed her in secret, in silence, while she wasn't looking, that was the final ritual. The old queen dethroned not by violence, but by irrelevance. And this is what they never tell you. Power can be taken back, not all at once, but moment by moment. Every time you say no to a lie, every time you act without waiting for permission, every time you stop apologizing for your own sovereignty. Jake didn't just secure a car, he ignited something. A spark passed man to man, from screen to soul, reminding us what it feels like to own ourselves again. But this comes at a cost. Because the moment you step outside the lines, the moment you stop obeying the invisible script, they will come for you. They will shame you, mock you, call you dangerous, arrogant, unhinged. Good, because that's when you'll know you're no longer theirs. You've become unque, apturable. And that is what Section 6 is all about. Because now that you've seen the system from the outside, now that the spell is broken, there's one final question left to answer. What will you do with the fire? By now, you've felt it. Not just the story, but the awakening. The part of you that stood taller when Jake turned the key. The part that smiled when steel met rubber, and silence finally became action. You didn't come here for entertainment. You came for a mirror. One that showed you what's been taken, and what can still be reclaimed. This was never about a Tesla. This was about the man you used to be, before the system told you to sit down, speak softly, and be grateful you're allowed anything at all. Every institution, from HOA boards to governments, schools to screens, has taught you to obey for peace. But they lied. Obedience doesn't bring peace. It brings permission to be violated again and again, until your edges are so worn down you don't remember what they were guarding. But now, maybe for the first time in years, you remember. That fire, that wasn't rebellion, that was restoration. Jake didn't just win a petty war. He reminded the rest of us what victory even looks like. Not trophies, not applause, but the silence of a man who doesn't answer to anyone else's fear. And Patricia? She was never the enemy. She was the test. Because every man will meet a Patricia in his life, someone who demands your obedience while smiling sweetly and quoting rules they barely understand. It may be a boss, a partner, a bureaucrat, a platform, or even your own voice whispering compliance in the name of comfort. But you now hold the code. You've seen what happens when a man draws a line in fire and doesn't flinch. So I'll ask you now, not as a narrator, but as a brother, will you weld your will to the ground? Will you seal your sanctuary against the trespass of systems? Will you vanish into the wild and come back untouchable? Or will you sit still and let them park their power inside your soul forever? You already know the answer. That's why you're still he. Comment below. One more time. Steel over silence. Fire over fear. Steel over silence. Fire over fear. Then look at the world with new eyes. Because once you've seen what lies beneath the surface, you don't get to go back. Welcome to the fire. Now become it.